The air on Thrennari shimmered with silent tension as Elia staggered through the cracked violet sands, her skin pulsing with faint cyan that blinked faster the closer death crept behind her. The planet was dying slowly, like a candle starved, of oxygen suffocating in silence, its atmosphere no longer kind to life. Elia, the last of the Thrennari emissaries, stumbled toward the wreckage of a ship whose smoke still spiraled into the orange sky, unaware if its source was a miracle or a trap. She was not built to feel desperation. Her kind had evolved past emotion millennia ago, binding their DNA to pure logic and diplomatic coldness. But today, Elia felt something stir beneath her glowing skin, something ancient and forbidden, a whisper of fear, a scream of hope. Her body was breaking down from exposure to the human weapon used weeks ago. Not a bomb, not a virus, but something worse. A wave of pure emotional feedback, unleashed during a failed negotiation that had gone wrong. It wasn't meant to be a weapon, and yet, for the Thrennari, who had erased emotion from their DNA, raw human empathy was poison. Her organs trembled with confusion. Her neural lattice glitched from surges of unwanted memories and phantom feelings that weren't hers. She heard laughter that did not belong to her, saw faces she had never met, and worst of all, she remembered the warmth of a child's hug, though her kind had outlawed offspring centuries ago. She should have fled long ago, but something tethered her to the crash site, something she couldn't explain. Her species would have called it irrational, but something deeper in her bones, mutating, changing, called it destiny. As the heat of the sun intensified, baking the wounded landscape, she fell to her knees near the shattered hull of the ship, her breathing ragged, throat dry. Then she saw him, a silhouette limping out of the shadows, framed by the torn metal and still burning edges of the human vessel. He wasn't wearing armor, nor did he raise a weapon. He looked broken, limping from a wound in his side, yet his eyes burned with concern, the way her people had once feared in old myths. In his hand, he carried no scanner, no tool of extraction, just a flask of water and a blanket slung over his shoulder. The human was alone, damaged, and clearly dying too. But when he saw her, he stopped in his tracks, his face both frightened and awed, and then, without hesitation, he knelt beside her, offering the water with shaking hands. Elia's eyes flickered, her system screamed at her to retreat, but some small, corrupted part of her DNA made her reach out, not for the flask, for his hand. Her fingers, trembling, touched his skin, and in that moment, something shifted in the silence between two dying creatures, something neither technology nor evolution could explain. The human touched her, and something deep within her soul opened like a locked door, cracking for the first time in eons. Gavin didn't know what he was supposed to feel. The emergency beacon had gone silent 2 days ago, and the rations were nearly gone. His ship was a splintered carcass of fire and static, and his body screamed with every breath from the cracked ribs he earned during atmospheric entry. He hadn't expected to survive the crash, much less find something waiting for him in the sand. At first, when he saw her, he thought she was a hallucination. The alien moved like a ghost, her skin glowing faintly, eyes wide and unblinking, leaking light like tears. She didn't speak, not with words, but something in the way she reached for him told him everything he needed. She was in pain, lost, dying, and despite every warning issued by command about Thrennari bioresistance and potential neurological contamination, Gavin did the one thing that no one on Earth ever seemed to stop doing. He helped. He didn't care that her kind had once ruled over galactic negotiations like cold-blooded aristocrats. He didn't care that the Thrennari had threatened Earth with economic exile for barbaric sentimentality years ago. All Gavin saw was someone alone and afraid, someone kneeling in a desert where nothing should have lived. And so he held her hand, but her fingers were like glass fragile, buzzing with energy beneath the skin, and so unnaturally warm. She stared at him like she was trying to understand him at the molecular level, like she could feel his intentions through the pulse in his wrist. She didn't speak, but something between them exchanged more than words. Her breathing steadied as she sipped water from the flask he handed her. Her body twitched from time to time, spasming, like a system trying to reject an incompatible code. But she didn't pull away. Gavin could feel her thoughts pressing against his skull, not invasive, not violent, just confused, curious, and frightened. He tried to talk, to fill the silence with something human. "I'm Gavin," he whispered, unsure why he was even telling her. "I was the engineer. Everyone else, they didn't make it." He looked at her, unsure if she understood, but the way her brows twitched slightly, the way her eyes widened at the word engineer, told him she was listening in her own way. He reached into the medpack on his belt and gently wrapped her arm with a synth band, ignoring the way her skin reacted, tiny sparks dancing at the edges of his touch. This is gonna help your vitals stabilize. If your biology is even remotely like ours, it should buy you a little time. He felt ridiculous explaining medical tech to an alien emissary. She was probably centuries ahead of him in terms of knowledge, but she let him do it. She sat still as his hands moved with awkward kindness, her gaze never leaving his face. And then she did something that made Gavin freeze. She copied him. Her other hand moved to the kit, trembling, and tried to mimic what he'd done, bandaging his side. Her touch was clumsy, alien, but gentle. She didn't know what she was doing, but she tried. He wanted to ask her so many questions. What was she doing here? Was she part of the delegation that humanity tried to negotiate peace with? Did she survive the emotional pulse that their diplomats had accidentally unleashed? Raw human grief channeled through an amplifier that broke more than just language barriers? He didn't know, but her presence answered something deeper, something buried under protocol and fear. She wasn't an enemy. She wasn't a monster. She was just someone caught in the crossfire of two civilizations, too different to touch each other without bleeding. As night fell across the dunes and the stars blinked through the dusty sky, Gavin leaned back against a broken wing of his ship, watching her curl beneath the silver blanket he'd shared. He wasn't sure if she needed warmth, but she hadn't refused it. Her glow had dimmed, now softer, almost calming. Her breathing was steady, and once or twice, he caught her watching him, not as a threat, but as if she was seeing something impossible, something beautiful. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow. Rescue wasn't coming. Supplies were limited. But in this moment, under a broken sky, Gavin felt something he hadn't felt since the war began. Not fear, not duty. Something older, harder to kill. It pulsed in his chest like a second heartbeat. Hope. The second night on Thrennari was colder, lonelier in its silence, as if even the planet held its breath for what was unfolding between them. Gavin stirred awake from shallow, unrestful sleep, haunted by images of his crew screaming as the ship tore open, of memories buried beneath grief that never had time to settle. He blinked slowly in the half-light of the alien moon, his breath fogging in the dry air. Then he saw her, Elia, sitting a few feet away, her back straight, face turned upward, watching the stars with an expression that did not belong to someone without emotion. Her features, once smooth and unreadable, were now edged with something unmistakably human, sorrow. She hadn't spoken a word since they met, not aloud. But Gavin was beginning to understand her in ways he didn't expect, through gesture, through the shifting light beneath her skin, which glowed warmer when she was near him. And tonight, it pulsed low, almost mournful. He pushed himself to sit, wincing as pain laced through his ribs. "You miss them," he said quietly, watching her profile catch the blue cast of the moon. "Your people." She turned to him slowly. The glow on her temples flickered. Then, to his astonishment, she nodded. Just once, he didn't press her. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, charred object, a photo half burnt at the corners, its edges curled from the crash. A woman and a boy, smiling, happy. Earth behind them. He handed it to her without explanation. Her long fingers brushed it carefully, as if afraid the image would vanish. And when her glowing eyes met his again, something in them cracked. A veil lifted. And she reached out, not with her hands this time, but with her thoughts. It wasn't speech, not exactly. But a wave of emotion poured from her and into him like a warm current through the mind. Sorrow, guilt, longing so vast it felt ancient. He saw a palace of crystal shatter in her memory. A council of her kind, watching through motionless eyes as Earth's ambassadors wept during peace talks. He saw Elia protest silently as her people dismissed the human's strange outbursts of pain as weakness. He saw her stand alone in the aftermath, listening to the echo of a human child's sob on the diplomatic frequency they never meant to receive. And he felt something else, something she didn't mean to share. Shame. The guilt of standing with those who turned their backs on empathy, and the unbearable curiosity she carried ever since. About humans. About feeling. Gavin's throat tightened. "You were changed by it," he whispered. "The emotional wave. It did something to you, didn't it?" She didn't nod this time. Instead, she reached forward and pressed 2 fingers to the center of his chest, right over his heart, then to her own. Her touch lingered there, her light shimmering brighter than he'd seen it before. And then, without warning, a tear liquid. Luminescent fell from her eye. Gavin reached out and caught it instinctively. It sizzled gently against his palm, but did not burn. Instead, a wave of warmth spread up his arm, and he knew impossibly that part of her was now inside him, just as he was inside her. Something unspoken had passed between them, a bridge built not with words or treaties, but with grief shared. Between species who had never meant to understand one another. It was more than empathy, it was communion. They sat in silence for hours, neither knowing how to move forward, but unwilling to turn away. When Gavin's hand brushed hers again, she didn't flinch. She leaned into it. And for the first time in her long life, Elia closed her eyes not to shut out thought, but to feel something fully. The sun rose hours later, casting golden light over broken metal and healing hearts. They didn't speak, still couldn't, but something had changed between them overnight. Gavin stood a little taller. Elia's glow was steadier. They ate together, tending the small fire he'd made from wreckage fuel and hope. She tried human food made a face that almost looked like disgust, then amusement, and Gavin laughed. The sound echoed across the canyon like a living thing, startling a pair of winged creatures from their nests, and she laughed too. A soft, melodic sound he never expected from someone who came from silence. Gavin stared at her, realizing that whatever happened next, rescue, death, transformation, they were no longer strangers, no longer alone in the universe. They were bonded now, not just by survival, but by the kind of understanding that transcended biology, culture, or war. He didn't know what their future held. But in her smile, in the soft light of her skin beside the fire, he saw future worth. Reaching for asterisk, the third day began with a warning etched in light. Thin lines of data etched themselves into the air above Elia's skin, flickering like a code unraveling, cascading from her scalp to her chest in trembling waves. Gavin watched helplessly as her body spasmed under the weight of it. At first he thought it was another surge of emotional feedback, maybe a delayed reaction from their bond. But when Elia stumbled to her knees, clutching her side with a hiss of static through clenched teeth, he rushed forward, catching her before she collapsed completely. Her eyes, once focused and alive, darted around as though she were being spoken to by ghosts. He held her close, murmuring her name over and over. Though she had never spoken it herself, he had chosen it from the documents scattered across the wreckage, fragments of the Thrennari envoy files salvaged in the dust. "Elia," he whispered, trying to anchor her. "Stay with me." "What's happening?" Then her hand jerked up to his face, eyes wide with sudden terror, and something passed through her touch again, not warmth this time, but cold knowledge. It hit him like a jolt of ice, not memory, but prophecy. A shared vision spilled into his mind like a floodgate broken open. He saw the stars dim, one by one. He saw Earth burning not from bombs, but from silence cut off, isolated, sanctioned by the collective because of what the humans had done. The wave, the accidental emotional pulse that shattered Thrennari unity and fractured hundreds of alliances. He saw alien leaders debating extermination. He saw Elia kneeling before them, pleading without words, her body already changing, already infected by the very humanity they despised. She wasn't just a diplomat, Dot. She was the vector. The wave hadn't simply damaged her neural systems. It had rewritten part of her DNA. Something ancient had unlocked within her, the long-dormant remnants of Thrennari emotional pathways, buried deep in their genetic code, long since thought dead. And through her connection to Gavin, it was spreading faster. Her body was mutating, adapting, feeling, and worse, replicating. Her kind would see it as a virus, a corruption. Elia was no longer pure by their standards. She was the first of something new, an evolutionary split, and the Thrennari would never allow it to live. Gavin stumbled back, breath stolen by the weight of what he'd just seen. "They're coming, aren't they?" he asked, voice hoarse. "They know. They'll try to wipe you out." Elia nodded slowly, her face etched with something new, regret. "But not just you," he continued, dread rising like bile. "Anyone you've touched, anyone you've bonded with." His own heart pounded as realization struck. "Me." She tried to speak, then not through touch or light, but a sound broken and raw. No, it was barely a whisper, cracked and laced with pain. The effort tore something in her throat, but she pushed on, desperate to say more. "Run you must," but Gavin shook his head. "I'm not leaving you. Not now, not when this." He gestured between them, to the faint trail of light that shimmered between their hands like a tether of living emotion. "Not when this means something." She pulled away from him, then not in rejection, but in protection, and stood with trembling legs, the sand swirling around her as if drawn to her presence. The changes were accelerating. Her back arched in pain, and Gavin could see ridges forming beneath her skin, like new pathways being born. Her body was becoming something hybrid, something no longer fully Thrennari and not fully human either. Something terrifying. Something miraculous. The sky cracked with a sonic ripple. A distant dot appeared, sleek, silver, merciless. A Thrennari. Pure fire vessel. Gavin's blood froze. They had come faster than he expected. They must have tracked her signal, perhaps the emotional resonance she'd accidentally broadcast across the exo-atmosphere. Maybe they'd always feared this kind of transformation, and now that it had begun, they would burn the whole planet to make sure it ended. He turned to her, panic rising. "We have to hide. There's a cave system east of here. I saw it on the descent near the canyon ridge. If we move now," but Alia stood still, watching the sky with a haunted expression. The light from her body pulsed slowly now, like a heartbeat caught in hesitation. She looked at Gavin, and he understood before she even shared it. They wouldn't stop with her dot if the purifiers confirmed emotional contamination. If they confirmed human DNA had bonded with Thrennari evolution, then Earth would be next. What had started as an accident had become a miracle. But the universe wouldn't see it that way, Dot. It would see it as war, and Alia, the bridge between them, would be the first casualty. The wind howled across the scorched plains of Ether 9 as Gavin and Alia fled into the broken canyons, the cliffs like jagged bones rising from the desert. The Thrennari ship had entered orbit, casting a shadow so vast it seemed to stretch across the sky itself. Gavin could feel the hum in the air, that unnatural thrum of anti-life energy pulsing down from the clouds. Searching, scanning. They weren't here to rescue. They were here to erase. And deep in his gut, Gavin knew that any signal of Alia's transformation, any trace of her altered DNA or emotional imprint, would be justification enough to purge the entire region. That meant he was a target too now. Not because of what he'd done, but because of what they'd become. Together, they stumbled into a jagged rock formation where a hollow opened beneath an overhang, a fissure carved by ancient wind and time. Gavin pulled her inside, shielding her glowing body with his own as the cliffs around them groaned from the low-altitude pulse sweeps. The Thrennari weren't firing yet, but the scans were getting closer, more precise, and Gavin knew it was only a matter of hours, maybe minutes, before they triangulated Elia's unique signature. She was changing faster than either of them could control now. Her skin flickered with waves of color and sound. Her voice, a voice she was only just learning to use, began to crackle with strange harmony, like her vocal cords were being rewritten by the emotional signals now embedded in her blood. He watched her eyes flash with sorrow and anger, flickers of memory, not just hers, but his flashes of his childhood, the scent of rain on rusted fences, the face of his mother crying in the kitchen after his enlistment. She wasn't reading his mind, she was remembering with him, and the intimacy of that made Gavin tremble more than any threat outside the cave. He crouched beside her, pressing a hand against her spine as her body shuddered from another wave of transition. "You said I should run," he said quietly. "You knew they'd kill you, maybe me, and you still reached for me that first day." Alia turned, her voice broken but clearer now, trembling like a newborn melody. "Because I wanted to know if it was real." "What?" "Emotion," she whispered. "Human emotion. They told us it was disorder, but it's not. It's power." Outside, the rocks shook. A thunderous boom echoed through the canyon, a proximity warning blast. The ship was zeroing in. Gavin swallowed hard, his hand trembling. "I have to give them something. A decoy, maybe?" Or he paused, the idea forming like a storm in his chest. "I could draw them off, lead them away. Buy you time to finish changing." She stared at him, horrified. "They'll kill you." "Yeah," he said. "They probably will. But if I don't, they'll kill you, and then Earth's next. They won't see your transformation as evolution. They'll see it as infection. You're not just changing, you're the future. And they'll burn it all to stop that." Her face twisted in agony, not physical, but emotional, real, raw, the very thing her people had once feared. Gavin leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, skin to glowing skin. "We didn't mean to change each other," he whispered. "But we did. And now we've got one shot to make it mean something." "I can't lose you," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the rumble outside. He smiled faintly, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "You haven't, whatever happens. I'm part of you now, right?" She nodded, her eyes filled with light and tears, both real. Gavin stood, shoulders squared, blood still drying in his bandages, fire in his lungs. He was a man with nothing left to lose, but suddenly, with her, he'd found something worth dying for. He grabbed the transmitter from his ruined kit, hacked it with a few quick gestures, and began to send out a pulse his location amplified, glowing like a beacon on the scanners. "I'm going to lead them away from the canyon," he said. "You stay here, hide deep, finish the change, survive." "No," Live, he said firmly, eyes blazing. That's how we win. She didn't argue again, as he limped out into the dawnlight, a lone figure beneath a dying sky. Elliot crawled deeper into the earth, the cave walls glowing with her changing form. And as his signal flared bright and unmistakable, Gavin looked up at the descending ship and whispered a prayer not to any god, but to the stubborn, fragile thing inside him that had always refused to die. Humanity. And then he ran straight toward the monsters who feared the one thing they could never engineer or erase. Hope. Asterisk. Gavin ran with the reckless defiance of someone who knew his life no longer belonged to him, his boots slamming against the cracked earth, lungs heaving, every breath a stitch of fire. The sky roared above as the Thrennari purifier vessel descended lower, its shadow consuming the horizon, blotting out the sun with a cold precision that reeked of extinction. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Not because he didn't want to see her. He wanted nothing more, but because if he did, he might hesitate, and hesitation now would mean her death. His death, the death of everything their bond had created. The ship hovered barely a kilometer overhead when the first sweep hit. A beam of blinding blue light seared across the sand, vaporizing a ridge just meters to his right. Gavin stumbled, but kept going, his hands raised, transmitter clutched in one, pulsing with false Thrennari signals he'd spliced together from the wreckage of her diplomat tablet. He was bluffing, using her frequency, masking it with his own biological rhythms to make himself look like the source of the emotional corruption. If the ship was scanning for the infection, it would see him, and it did. The vessel slowed. Then, impossibly, it spoke low and vibrating through the air like a monolith's voice. Thrennari entity identified. Code breach Alpha Prime. Emotional contagion detected. Immediate sterilization required. Gavin spat blood into the dirt and raised his chin. Yeah, he muttered to himself. Come sterilize this. He was ready to die. He knew it. But somewhere deep in the canyon, Elia lived, changing, becoming. The idea of her surviving, of them surviving through her, was the only comfort he needed. Then the beam fired Dot. It wasn't like fire or plasma. It was something worse. A null. Light, an erasure of presence, a column of annihilation that screamed silently as it tore toward him. Gavin didn't run. He planted his feet and faced it, defiance written in every molecule of his broken body. But just before it reached him, the sky ripped open. A second wave of light burst from the canyon, a swirl of color, of sound, of emotion that shattered the sterile stillness of the battlefield. A pulse erupted from the cave like a tidal wave made of memory and love and pain and being. It struck the beam midair, and for the first time, the purifier's weapon hesitated. Then it fractured. The column of death cracked like glass shards of null energy suspended in the air as Elia emerged, walking, not staggering, not crawling, but walking, her skin now brilliant with shifting color, her body humming with a harmony no human ear could have invented. She wasn't fully Thrennari anymore, nor human. Her form was a synthesis of emotion and structure, strength and vulnerability, her eyes alive with light, her presence undeniable. The ship reacted instantly, switching targets, scanning her anew, mutation confirmed. Unauthorized hybrid life form. Execute purge protocol. Elia raised her hand. And the ship stopped. Not physically, but its systems went dark. Its lights blinked. Its scanners faltered. For the first time, the Thrennari technology encountered something it couldn't quantify. A biological interface laced with pure emotional data transmitted not through logic, but feeling. A code too fluid to imprison. Elia's glow intensified as she stepped between Gavin and the ship, her arm reaching behind to steady him. Their fingers locking. Together. Then she spoke, her voice no longer broken. You fear emotion, she said, her words echoing across the air like thunder softened by truth. You erase it because you don't understand it. That we are more than you imagined. We are not disease. We are evolution. The ship shook. Warning alarms rose into a scream. Emotional resonance breach. Core destabilizing. Cognitive eye loop unraveling. And then the ship did the unthinkable. It fled. It rose. Engines roaring and soared back into the sky like a wounded predator. Systems glitching, retreating not from weapons, but from a feeling it could not kill. Gavin collapsed to his knees, his body shaking with relief, awe, and the beginning of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the war began. Love. Elia knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his body, her light pulsing in time with his heartbeat. You saved me, she whispered, voice full of wonder. He shook his head, smiling through cracked lips. No. You saved us. They held each other in the stillness that followed, the dust settling around them like ash from a burned-away future. That would never come. and in its place something new had just begun to breathe. The sun bled across the sky in hues of gold and lavender as the silence returned to Thrennari, not the dead silence of despair, but a new stillness, like the breath held between the end of a storm and the beginning of something living. The Thrennari ship had vanished into the upper atmosphere, and though neither Elia nor Gavin knew whether it was gone for good, they both sensed that something inside it had changed. The purifiers had seen what they weren't supposed to see, felt what their programming had never been meant to feel. And even machines, it turned out, could be haunted by truth. Elia sat beside Gavin in the canyon, the firelight flickering against her skin, which no longer glowed in fear or pain, but pulsed with calm, steady light. Her body had finished changing. Her DNA was now something new, not human, not Thrennari, but a bridge between them, woven with empathy, memory, and will. Her voice was clearer now, her presence grounded, and the subtle tremor that once lived in her hands was gone. She no longer feared what she had become, but Gavin, though alive, bore the weight of the price. His injuries had worsened. Internal bleeding had begun. The run, the pulse beacon, the confrontation his body was giving out. He lay with his head in her lap, the stars above them vast and unblinking. He smiled, but even she could feel the fading warmth in his chest. "Don't try to stop it," he whispered. "I knew this was coming." Elia cupped his cheek, her touch now softer than any artificial healing gel. "I can try to transfer stabilizing light. Maybe slow the decay." He shook his head gently. "No, don't. Waste it on me. You're the future. You need to leave this place. Find others. Tell them what happened here. Show them." Tears welled in her eyes, again real, shimmering. "I don't want to do this alone." "You won't," Gavin said, pressing her hand to his chest. "Because I'm part of you now. I always will be." A soft breeze moved through the canyon, and Elia leaned down, pressing her forehead to his, her glow enveloping them both like the breath of the stars. In that final moment, she reached into him one last time, not to take, but to remember. His life passed into her in waves of color and sound, his memories folding into her own. His childhood laughter, the ache of loss. The first time he saw her on the sands, everything etched into her as truth, and then Gavin's chest rose and did not fall again. She sat in silence for a long time after, her arms wrapped around the stillness he left behind. The fire burned low. The stars wheeled overhead. Her body pulsed with his last heartbeat still echoing through her dot when dawn came. She buried him beneath a cairn of obsidian shards, each one marked with light from her fingertips. She spoke words in both their languages, grief and gratitude, then turned to the rising light and walked away. She crossed the dead plains alone, but not empty dot in time. Others would find her human refugees, curious explorers, and even Thrennari, dissidents drawn by the pulse of her presence. She could not hide what she was. She became the signal, the beacon, a living message that the future didn't belong to those who erased their hearts, but to those who embraced the pain of feeling and the strength born from it. And in the centuries that followed, when the name Gavin was spoken across the stars, it wasn't in sorrow. It was with reverence. The human who touched her soul, the human who changed everything, the first of many.